Hello dear students, welcome to this class of MA Final, paper 5th B, that is American Literature. I am Dr. S.S.Vaidwan from the Department of English. And dear students, today we'll discuss the great American poet Walt Whitman and his influence on American poetry and how he shaped American poetry and American poetry it became a new established literary genre on the globe. So let us first discuss about Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman, he was christened as Walter Whitman, and he uh, born on May 31st, 1819. And dear students, he passed away on 26th March 1892. So, a great American poet. He also tried his hand at essays. He wrote some essays, and he also ventured into the field of journalism. So, a multifaceted personality and a person, a great humanist. He uh, he can be said to be a poet of transition also, because America at that time was passing through transcendentalism and realism. So we can call Walt Whitman a transition poet also. And the poet, he is often called the father of free verse. So this is very important, that in American literature and especially in American poetry, Walt Whitman is called the father of free verse. His work, of course, was very important, and his poetry of collection, particularly Leaves of Grass. This is very important because it is also prescribed in your syllabus, and you will be reading the preface to Leaves of Grass. So, this collection of poetry is very important, and it describes uh, the poet, and it also describes his sensuality. So, the poet Walt Whitman, he had great influence on American poetry, and the poet, he has expressed his mood, his philosophy, his way of life in this poetic collections, and especially in the poetry collection Leaves of Grass. So, a very important, notable poet of the American literature. So, let us talk about Walt Whitman. And as I told you, that he was second of the nine children. He was second of the nine children, and he was nicknamed as Walt. He completed his formal schooling, and after schooling, he went to follow his career, and he also worked with uh, printer Erastus Worthington in Brooklyn. So Brooklyn, this plays very important role in the life of Walt Whitman, because he has written a poem describing the Brooklyn River. Now, he is a person who worked in Brooklyn, then he moved to New York City, and actually he was working as a low level job in the New World. In the year 1842, he edited Aurora, and from 1846 onwards to 1848, that is for 2 years, he was editor of the Brooklyn Eagle. So he was working in with these he was working with these institutes, and his role as a editor was very important. And Walt Whitman, he wrote his Leaves of Grass, and this particular collection is very important. Now, he also experimented with some of the literary genres, but ultimately he wrote this Leaves of Grass. And Whitman, all his poems in this collection, they are marvelous poems. The Leaves of Grass was published on July 11, 1855. And Whitman's father died when at the age of 65 when this Leaves of Grass was published. And the first edition of Leaves of Grass, it was critically acclaimed, and the critics, they started focusing more on the offensive sexual themes which uh, were there in this collection, Leaves of Grass. But in 1856, Whitman revised Leaves of Grass. It was revised and re-revised again in 1860, and again in 1867. And some of the most important poets, they were added, and several other poems were corrected. So this uh, Leaves of Grass, it is a very important poem in the life of Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman, if we talk about his philosophy, uh, Walt Whitman, he gave a new shape to this American thought and his nationalism also. He was he opposed the extension of slavery in United States, and we can assert that he was a humanist because he was against this slavery. Then Whitman is often described as America's national poet because all his poems, they are rich with American nationalism. And this nationalistic fervor in the poetry of Walt Whitman, it makes him a national poet. Dear students, Walt Whitman, he was he can be said that he is a man who helped in shaping the American democracy also. So we can say that Walt Whitman, he was also a man who can be said that he had a part in shaping the American nationalism. So all his writings, they describe this uh, nationalism. Whitman, he is one of the most influential American poet, as I told you, and some of the modern critics like Ezra Pound, uh, they call him America's poet. So, dear students, if we try to say that Whitman, how did his poetry affect it? His poetry not only influenced the mainland America but also influenced Latin America and the Caribbean poets in the coming century, in the 19th and the 20th centuries. So, a very important poet, and his importance, it can be seen in his poetry, in his Leaves of Grass, which is his signature poem, and some of the important, uh, we can say, poets, some of the important literary critics like Harold Bloom, a literary critic, Harold Bloom, he wrote to the preface of Leaves of Grass that, I quote, "If you are American, then Walt Whitman is your imaginative father and mother." So, unquote. Look at this very important sentence, and I am quoting here Harold Bloom. So, dear students, the poet Walt Whitman is a poet who has expressed his philosophy freely and who has shaped the American nationalism. He is the national. He can be called the national poet of the great American land. And we will continue with some of his important works in the next video. Thank you very much.